Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you so much for listening. You will notice that there is no one on the other end of the tin can and string this week. Not at the moment, anyway. What happened was we invited legendary guest Justis Mosqueda onto the show. Fans of the show will know that Justis tends to bring a lot of problems wherever he goes in the podcast world. He's the reason why we have literally two, not one, two lost episodes of the show that we couldn't air because of technical problems that he managed to bring on to the show. We've had over 100 shows. He is the only guest we've ever brought on that has caused everything to come to a screeching halt repeatedly. And that's what ended up happening on Thursday when we tried to record this originally. We did a Skype call with him, his internet ended up crapping out, and we couldn't end up having a show. In a rare showing of solidarity, both Dusty and I both looked at the situation and went, "You handle this yourself, Arif." And so we did. So what we have is a really nice interview done by Arif in the style of the show with Justis Mosqueda. And they are going to talk all about the Senior Bowl that happened on Saturday night. So we have a great show for you. Arif does a very good job. Both Dusty and I are both prepared for the tweets, the emails, and the comments, both on Reddit and on the Daily Norseman, saying that Arif should be able to do this damn thing himself. So, you're not going to hurt our feelings. We're aware, and we are totally prepared for this. But before we do that, I did want to quick mention that we had a couple of great donations this week. As you know, this is a listener-supported show. We do not have advertising on this show. This is straight from you guys. We appreciate that. Our new equipment this last year that improved the sound quality so much. The ability to go to 2 shows a week over the season were the direct result of you guys. So again, thank you so much. We did have a couple of donations to go over real quick. If you would like to donate to the show, you can do so at norsecodepodcast.com. You can go to the very bottom of the page and click the donate button, or you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode. Patreon being more of an NPR drive sort of thing, where you can become a sustaining member. You can support the show in small increments and just have that charge over the year. Like if I wanted to just go, $1 for the year. They end up getting $12 from me overall, but I'm just going to do $1 for this. It really does end up adding up and helping out with the show. It helps with the cost we have for space. It helps with domain costs and everything, and we just ended up paying off for most of the coming year, which is awesome. We really, really like the situation we're at, and we love the relationship we have with our fans. So if you hear value in this, if you see value in the show, please let us know. But a couple of quick donations we want to do to get out of the way real quick is Charles Harrison out of Hawaii. We have listeners in Hawaii. I will never stop being amazed at the spread of listenership we have for Norse Code. Charles Harrison from Hawaii donated via PayPal for, quote, Norse Code love. Thank you, Charles. Thank you. We also have a donation from Matthew Fries from Pennsylvania, who donated via PayPal for, quote, James and Dusty to get Matt Waldman's RSP. It's a seriously great piece of work. I would have to believe he's referring to Matt Waldman's rookie scouting portfolio, which you can get at mattwaldmanrsp.com. I'm certainly going to take a look at this. I admittedly haven't done a lot of work for the Senior Bowl, as I am not technically a part of Draft Twitter. But I'm really interested in it, especially with the draft coming up. This is a lot of really great information, so we are both plugging this and thanking you for the donation. Again, we really do appreciate it. Next up is John Herzog, who is a new Patreon supporter, and Jim Gandy, who is also a new Patreon supporter. We are doing really well on Patreon. We really appreciate it. We were just able to buy Dusty some new equipment as well. So thank you guys so much. We really do appreciate it. And if you would like to send us questions, you can do so at NorseCodeDM on Twitter. You can message myself. I am Big Mono, although I also do the Twitter account for Norse Code. You can tweet Dusty at Dusty O'Connell. But the real reason why you want to tweet us is to tweet Arif Hassan, NFL. And that is Arif's Twitter account. So go ahead and do that. And now that we have all the formalities out of the way, I do believe we have an interview. And as far as I know, nothing broke or started on fire during the show or immediately afterwards. So I'm glad Arif took care of this himself. Arif, take it away.
All right, so as you may have heard from the pre-recorded intro, we won't be having James or Dusty on this show proper, but I'll be hosting the show for the first time, this time with Justis Mosqueda, who's been on the show a number of times, has been a fantastic guest as much as he's cursed the show. Say hi, Justis.
Hi, Justis.
And Justis is just back from the Senior Bowl. I'm sure he's got a ton of stories to tell. We'll get to that. Or the more fun stories to tell anyway, a little bit later in the podcast. But first, is this your first Senior Bowl?
It is. Yeah, this is my first time. Like, I met Andrew Parsons, Eric Stoner, and Jinx in Vegas, and I've met Matt Harmon and Alex Geller in Los Angeles visiting Eric Stoner. Other than that, like, every single person on Draft Twitter is like, they're just live behind a computer to me at this point. And then I got down there and just seeing everyone in person, I'm like, oh, all right. Everyone is short other than Ledyard. Ledyard's tall, and he's also built. And Jeff Risden. Like, Jeff Risden, when he talks about he used to play volleyball, he's not joking. And Steve, PFF Steve Palazzolo.
Lord. Yeah, I know. He's like 6'8" or something like that. He's huge.
I was in the car with Eric Galco, and I was like, yeah, I'm trying to meet Steve. And Eric Galco was like, look, here's the thing. I'm 6 feet tall. And, like, when I talk to Steve, if I've talked to him for, like, 5 minutes, I get a cramp in my neck. So you better, like, talk to Steve, but, like, try to make it short. Because, like, you need that time. Yeah.
He was a pitcher in the minors, I think. That height probably actually didn't help him that much if he was, like, 6'8". But, yeah. All right, well, we've got some people who, like, asked some, like, instant questions to get out of the way before we talk about, like, the Senior Bowl. So the first one is, have you ever listened to Wiz Khalifa album all the way through?
Does Cushion Orange Juice count? I've listened to Wiz Khalifa albums all the way through, but Cushion Orange Juice is the only one that I'll, like, actually listen to from, like, front to back. That's a mixtape, and that was, like, when I was in high school, and I also live in Oregon, so everyone smokes weed, but, like, I don't know, that's pretty good. People like that, like Taylor Aldice, or I forget how the hell you say it. People like that album. People like Black Hollywood. Wiz is corny. Wiz always seemed like big Snoop Dogg.
Well, okay, so if Wiz is corny, then the fact that he has a beef with Kanye has to be hilarious.
It's wild corny. And that all happened during, like, day one of practices during the Senior Bowl, too. So
you missed a lot of it.
Yes,
yeah.
I missed, like, literally all of it. Like, people, I was just, like, I think I was just, like, tweeting stuff from, like, the online drills, because this is what happened, man. I knew I was going to forget something when I packed for the Senior Bowl, and I was like, I have this, I have this, I have this. In very Husto fashion, I made a spreadsheet and was like, I need to get all of this before I pack at like 2 o'clock in the morning. So I go through everything, and I hit everything, and then when I think it was the day after, or, like, 2 days after I got to Mobile, because Charles took forever. I stayed with Charles McDonald, right? At Sunday Fiasco, follow him. He's very good. He's my brother. So he, like, pulls out his glasses or something, and I was like, God damn it. I was like, I forgot my glasses in Oregon. So basically what happened was, like, I made the executive decision to be like, I'm going to follow the offensive and defensive linemen wherever they go. So I'm, like, trying to, like, go around, like, trying to get different vantage points. Like, all right, I can't take a video here because, like, Mike Tomlin's head's in the way and things like that. So I'm just, like, going off, just trying to fire off tweets. And then, like, people are just in my mentions like, yo, stop what you're doing. Like, there's more important, like, I think Eric Stoner tweeted at me, was like, there's more important things happening. Someone was like, finger in the booty, like, hashtag finger in the booty. And I was like, I don't know what's going on, man. Like, I'll just catch up with this later. Like, I got to get this done.
But then you deleted the tweets.
He did delete the tweets because he's an inconsistent person. He's very much like me. Yeah, he's my father. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That whole situation is just, like, crazy weird. And then, like, still haven't fully, like, dissolved it in either. Wiz is just corny, man. Like, this is the thing about Wiz. Wiz always seemed like he's Snoop Dogg, but only Snoop Dogg, like, post, like, being, like, gangster Snoop Dogg, right?
Right.
He's just like, hey, I'm the people that, like, Bomani Jones has talked about this before, where, like, it's crazy that Snoop Dogg is, like, the person that he is now. because he used to be like, yo, Snoop Dogg was scary, and now like Snoop Dogg, like your mother knows who Snoop Dogg is. And I was like, oh yeah,
Yeah, and
like,
Snoop Dogg's career's gone in a bunch of interesting directions. He even has I think he has a Girls Gone Wild that he hosts. There's one of the tapes.
Shouts to him, man.
Yeah.
Shouts to him. Shouts to Long Beach. Yeah, so he always seemed, I don't know, man. I don't mess with Wiz. And that's always been a thing where I'm like, whatever. I don't know.
And then the second question comes from @Rand_Demos, which is an alright name, Randy Moss. Star Wars related question, also related to some of the work that you've done with pass rushers, the hashtag Force players. Who's the more promising Force player, Rey or Kylo Ren?
Oh man,
this has got to be easy. Come on,
it's got to be Kylo.
What, really? Seriously? No.
Yeah.
It's no, because Kylo has to be like Sean Oakman, where he steps off the bus and you're like, wow, this dude is clearly the dude, right? And then you see him in action, man.
Melvin Ingram is the little Melvin Ingram or something. The Clay Matthews.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I can see that now. All right.
Yeah.
Wow, this podcast is starting off weird.
It always does, man. You've been on this podcast enough times. It gets pretty weird.
Oh yeah. Yes.
All right. Let's talk about the Senior Bowl just sort of generally, right? So you watched the game, but obviously, like, everyone's been saying this for the last couple of years. The game is like significantly less important than the practices. So, like, who stood out to you in the practices, just in general?
Oh, in the practices? So, like I said, I was following offensive defensive line for the most part, but I was able to catch some other guys. It seemed like people loved the Sela corner, Harlan Miller. He was the long guy, other than crap, man. I'm gonna pull up this sheet right now. I'm an unprepared human being. I'm a horrible human. I'm a horrible guest for podcasts.
It's not like we weren't gonna have this podcast like 3 days ago. There's no reason you'd be prepared or anything.
Yeah, something like that. Dude, my internet, that was just a horrible situation, too. So DeAndre Hall from Northern Iowa was the kid who during the weigh-ins was like the craziest long, just giant corner, and everyone was like, oh my. Like, everyone was like, oh, he's going to be the guy. And then Harlan Miller ended up. Yeah, he's like 6'2", and people were just like, oh man. And then they got on the field and like, oh, you can't play at all. You shouldn't be here. And then Harlan Miller ended up being the like 6'+ guy who just kind of showed out the entire practice. And he was the guy who was breaking on balls like crazy and stuff during the game too. So I mean that kind of translates there. Someone was saying that they did the like Seahawks minimum requirements or whatever for the defensive backs, and that like only like 3 of them passed or something like that.
I mean that makes sense. So,
yeah, I mean,
did Harlan Miller pass?
I believe he did. Yeah, I believe he did. I mean, he's a pretty big dude.
Wait, did you get arm length measurements at the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, they do, because everyone talked about LaRaven Clark's. They were like, oh my god.
Oh, right. He's like a 7 foot wingspan or something like that.
Man, dude, he's weird because he's horrible, but then teams might make excuses for him because he played in an air raid system, right? And as someone who played offensive line in the air raid system in high school, I actually played in the Tony Franklin system when he was selling in. Tony Franklin was the offensive coordinator at California this past year.
He sells the videos and stuff.
Louisiana Tech. Yeah. So basically what you're doing if you run an air raid system, right, is since you're only using 5 in protection, you don't really have a tight end, and your back's running a route every time you're in pass game, right? So basically what you're doing is you're trying to bail with your offensive, like your first step is just like 3 kick slides. Like baseline is 3 kick slides. You're not like planning at all. So it's 3 kick slides because you want to have the defense stunt before you make contact with anyone. Because if you make contact with a guy and you're taking these drops and you have no help, if one offensive lineman messes up, it's a freaking wrap. So
because it's always man protection, right? Like you can't.
Yeah. So Raven Clark basically played college football in a system that has no like translation to the NFL, and he's a freak athlete. And it's like how long has
LaRaven played? Because that was like a big part of like TJ Clemmings, right? He's long, he's got no experience, but you could make an excuse for how bad he was, right? Because he'd only played offensive tackle for 2 years. So how long has LaRaven Clark been playing? Do you know?
Yeah, so I think he's been playing since high school. It seemed like the guy who blew up that hadn't played football for like his entire life was Jihad Ward, the pass rusher from Illinois who actually I went home on the flight with him to Dallas yesterday. So he wasn't here for the game because he messed up his. I think he told me it was his wrist. Yeah, he messed up his wrist. The last practice, like halfway through the last practice, it just walked off. It was around the same time that Braxton Miller had that hamstring injury or whatever when he was cramping up. But people only talked about Braxton, and I was like, look, here's the second best edge defender in this game, and he's walking through the tunnel through the stadium. Why isn't anyone trying to figure out what's going on?
Ward seems like he'd be a perfect Vikings pick then, right? I mean, he's like a pass rusher, which they always get. He's supposed to be super athletic, right? And he hasn't played football for very long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he is. He's a freaking
Vikings pick
like,
then.
We missed a weigh-in because we stayed like, what was it? Our alarm went off at like 8:30 or something, and it started at 8:30. And like I'd read pieces from like Jeff Risdon and stuff. Right? The rest were dropped right down. He's like, you need to be there 45 minutes early. I'm like, we haven't even gotten our credentials yet. Like we still need to go. I was like, just go back to sleep, Chuck. Just go back to sleep, Charles. We don't need to go.
This isn't happening today.
Plus the way that I figured, I was like, man, all these guys are gonna get weighed in again at the combine, and we're gonna throw these numbers away anyway. So we might as well just like these numbers don't even matter.
Yeah.
But just looking at Lil Raven Clark's player page, it appears he's a redshirt senior. He played at least his junior and senior years in high school because he was an all-district player in that time, and he has six relatives who played either college or professional sports. So
I'm not sure he has the same developmental upside as TJ Clemmings then.
Yeah. But no, Jihad Ward was the guy who I believe he picked up football. It was either the end of his sophomore year or the beginning of his junior year of high school. And he was like a big basketball guy before. So he ended up being a guy who had to take the JUCO route out of college or out of high school. And he ended up being like a super recruit out of JUCO. Like he was like the third or fifth, like I can't remember, it was like third or fourth or fifth defensive tackle coming out of junior college. So he signed with Illinois. Played.
Isn't that what Slide did back in before he was at North Carolina?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. So he was a guy who played end, and then this past year he's been playing 3 technique, and you don't see it with him at all on 3 technique. I mean, I went back and watched some games after the first practice because when I was saying this guy stood out more than anyone else, I was like, how the hell do we not think this guy's a top 10 pick? And then I went back to his film, and I'm like, oh my God, he's getting driven 5 yards off the ball against Ohio State over and over and over. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? I don't know if it's just like Ron Marinelli was like teaching him and he got better or what. But so like Ward is like as tall as like not as Oakman, but like guys like Carl Nassib who people are freaking out about their size. Mm-hmm. So he's as tall as those guys, but he's bigger. Like he's like Mario Williams' size. Like he's Mario Williams' size, and he can move around.
So he's like over 290.
Yeah, he's like 296 or something. Hold up, I'll pull it up. Yeah, he's 296 pounds. He's 6'5'1". So he's like a big dude. Like you look at him and you're like, oh crap! Like it's about to go down. And then in practice, so what was it? Day 2. I was watching practice with Josh Norris of NBC Sports and Matt Waldman, right? Of RSVP film room. So we're watching practice together, and I think we're watching the offensive linemen, which are on the south end zone, north end zone. So they're in the north end zone, right? And I just hear thwack, 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 and like without looking to the south end zone. I'm like, Josh, that's Jihad Ward, right? He goes, yep. I'm like, oh my God, dude, we're on the 35-yard line across the other side of the stadium, and you can tell who it is on the bags because he's the one who's just destroying them. Like he's nuts, man. He also in the one-on-ones he started showing a one-arm move and stuff too, and I'm like, that's one more pass rush move than I saw in like 3 game films of you. So wow. Like you don't understand how bad that film is. Like that film's like legitimately horrible.
I'll take a look at it. Did they ever kick him outside? Just like on nickel downs or something?
Every once in a while. So the Iowa game was the game that they actually started kicking him out some, which was the game that people told us to watch. And then even then, me and Charles McDonald still watched it, and we were like, nope, this is still bad. This is still really bad film. It's the same thing with Raven Clark, where we were talking to people and they're like, Lance Zierlein mocked him in the end of the first round. He might be the type of guy who could sneak into the first round. He's a big dude. Teams are going to forgive him and just write it off as like he's air raid guy. There's always guys like Derek Sherrod and stuff like that are just absolute projects who end up making it in the first round. Clemmings only fell because of his injury and things like that. And then you go back and watch film and you're like, this is disgusting. And you watch this game. Like this game against Spence, against a couple guys like Clark, just got dominated.
Wow. Well, I mean, and he looked bad in the game too, so that makes sense. So
yeah, he's not good.
So Jihad Ward stood out in the practices. We also heard a lot about Braxton Miller. We heard a lot about Carson Wentz. And those are already pretty big names going in, or I should say at least hype names going in. So Braxton Miller, I mean, he's like, I think he's 23 or will be 23 at the time of the draft. And obviously he doesn't have a ton of wide receiver experience as a quarterback. I think he's like 6'2", 190. Are you worried about a guy like that in terms of like his ability to become a wide receiver when he's 23 or something like that?
It seemed like he was super confident. Everyone who went to media day said that he just like he was basically like, you know what, I'm not here yet, but I'm gonna be there. You know what? He seemed like, I mean, he was telling people that he would have been the best quarterback there if he was playing. You know what I mean? He was just saying.
He was telling people that.
Yep. He said that and was like,
might have been right.
This is the problem. I messed up my shoulder. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if he was wrong. You got to remember, Braxton Miller and Chucky Keaton 2 years ago were my top senior quarterbacks entering the draft. So, and then they both got hurt and took a redshirt year. Yep. But Braxton was just like, look, I have a daughter. Like, I messed up my shoulder twice. Long term, if I want to stick around in the NFL, I need to make that move to receiver. So I might as well have done it now than later. But even that, what was it? The little screen pass, or it was a little curl or something that he dropped early on in the actual Senior Bowl was the first round. I think I don't know. People got very excited about him and were like quick to be like first round pick Braxton Miller. He's gonna be
I saw a couple of those tweets.
I don't know about his first round stuff. Yeah, I don't know about him being a first round pick, but I think he does.
But he looked top 100 to you.
Yeah. I mean, he clearly has the burst. Like, he's clearly a natural athlete. I mean, you got to remember, this is a guy who won. Did he win 2 or 3 Big Ten Offensive Player of the Years?
He won 2.
Yeah. Like, he's very much a fluid athlete. Like, he looks apart. He absolutely looks apart. I don't think there was a receiver this week that looked better than him, other than when I was able to catch glimpses of that Baylor guy, because that Baylor guy was making like one-handed catches that were nuts on the sideline. I was just like, oh, what? he would just make a couple plays every once in a while that would make the entire stadium just go, oh. Same with Fanica, the pass rusher from Utah. So no one could beat Spriggs in one-on-one situations other than Fanica, because Fanica would like fake just taking like just trying to like take the edge with like speed, right? Just take like speed of power move. And then he would just put a spin move on Spriggs and just beat the crap out of him. And he did that the last 2 days. Where he's like, oh, okay, you just like
caught him oversetting.
Just caught him oversetting. Just put the spin move on him. It's the same thing with Sheldon Rankins, the D tackle from Louisville.
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about Rankins, especially Chuck.
He's Kawan Short, young Kawan Short, Sheldon Rankins. Yeah, Sheldon Rankins. He went up against Glasgow, that Michigan center, who actually ended up playing like some guard reps and stuff too, right? So he was going against him, and everyone loved him from the Shrine Game, and he was the big guy who got to move up to the Senior Bowl, and people very much scared of Sheldon Rankins' first step. And then once Sheldon Rankins realized, oh, all these guys are overcorrecting, then he just put the spin move on him, and you just see like, what is it, like 315 pounds of just flab and muscle just spinning around in the backfield. Like, all right. Yeah.
So it seems like both Rankins and Flagg are pretty natural then, if they're able to sense oversetting and then kind of correct naturally with those spin moves.
Yeah, I think Fanica's really smart. Fanica or whatever. However you say his name, Utah. Right. His name's Utah. He's super smart. The other guy who's insanely smart is BYU's pass rusher, Bronson Kafusi, who actually ended up playing tackle in the game. No, he's like the son of like a D-line coach. Like, you know what I mean? So he's been basically bred, and he's like 24 or whatever. He was the guy who Walsh, the Jacksonville Jaguars defensive coordinator, who used to be their D-line coach up until this year. He was the guy who was running the drills with the D linemen. He was running the one-on-ones between the D linemen and O linemen. He would give them daps because like Bronson would pull out like 6 counter moves in like 1 rep, and you're like, man, I wish your feet were smarter so these could land quicker. But I mean, as far as like having the knowledge to pull these moves out, like it's crazy to watch Bronson go. He's just slower than everyone. It's just kind of unfortunate.
So better hands, and this actually fits with the slower than everyone. Bronson or Hauli? Kikaha.
Kikaha. Yeah, Kikaha for sure. Kikaha was nuts. Yeah. The other guy who has really good hands is Jaron Reed from Alabama. He's another guy who kind of fits.
Oh, yeah.
Look, man, this is the thing. People love Jaron Reed, and, like, I understand. Like, he played for Bama, and we were down in Mobile, and, like, everyone watched Bama, and everyone saw he had production, and everyone's, like, hot take is the whole, like, he's better than Ashawn and things like that, right? Reed very much is limited to playing 2-gap because of his feet alone. Like, I don't think he can play 3 technique.
You can see him playing, like,
I can see him playing 5 and 0. Yeah, he's playing a 3-4, and it has to be a traditional 3-4. He has great hands. He has heavy hands. He doesn't get moved off the ball often. But if you're asking him to 1-gap and get him to the backfield, just try any kind of penetration at all, I don't think he has that for an NFL guy. You know what I mean? So that was kind of a weird one where people like just kind of echoed the entire week, just like first-round pick, Jaron Reed, and I'm like, look, he could fit somewhere like Arizona. You know what I mean? Where Arizona does a bunch of weird stuff, and they'll just kind of put you in the right place, and he can play anywhere on the defensive line. And, you know, you can never have too many defensive linemen. Like, those guys are the most important guys on your defense, and it's the position that you rotate the most. But Reed, I mean, if you're trying to – you can't build a team around Reed, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of listeners who are big NDSU fans. I'm not one of them. But you hit a buzzsaw with NDSU Hive when you wrote a piece about Carson Wentz. This was before the Senior Bowl, I think. So has your take on Carson Wentz changed? And also remind everyone what your take on Carson Wentz was.
Yeah, so my take on Carson Wentz was essentially, I understand he has a bunch of tools and stuff, but he may have a crippling attribute, which is the fact that he freezes up when he has to get off of his first read, or he'll stay on his first read. Like, it very much so, you could see the gears turning in his head. Like, he doesn't look like a natural person who can read a defense. And I know I'll get a bunch of crap for it, and, like, NDSU Hive, shouts to Bison Nation. Bison! The Bison!
I love Bison Nation.
Yeah, man. They just come, and they just come. They're like, oh, my God, man. No, there's swarms of them, man. There's just swarms of them, and they don't stop.
So when I read that, actually, the first person I thought of, and obviously Wentz has wheels and this person does not, but the first person I thought of was Mettenberger, because once he was off his first read, he took forever to make a decision.
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily that he was bad under pressure, but that he would invite pressure so often that it kind of didn't matter that he wasn't bad under pressure. Does that, like, a Mettenberger who's really athletic, does that, like, make sense to you as a comparison?
Yeah, that's actually pretty good. Because I remember thinking of that about Mettenberger too, where I think I had tweets about Mettenberger heading into his senior season where I was like, look, man, you take forever to move up in the pocket, and when you do, you overstride with your feet. Like, there's going to be guys at the next level who are just going to hang around your legs and try to dive at you, trying to, like, you know, do what you can to bring this guy down, and you're going to end up blowing out your knee. And then, like,
he already has knee problems too.
Yeah, it was like the bowl game or something like that, where like that exact situation happened, where he overstrode with his front leg, and then a guy came like crashing down, and ended up being like, "Oh, now you tore your ACL." I was like, "Damn it!" Like, this is one of the times I wish I wasn't right.
Yeah,
it's unfortunate. Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Yep. The way that I explained him as a runner is like Jake Locker too, but I didn't want to make the full Jake Locker comparison, because if there's one thing that really killed Jake Locker, so if we're talking about like just specific attributes that'll just like ruin your career, right? Yeah. Jake Locker's worst attribute was the fact that he dropped his eyes every single time he saw pressure. Or it was like, if someone's flying past my face, it's a wrap. I'm ducking my head and I'm running, and it's a one-on-one between me and whoever the closest closest person.
Right, so your comparison was more the running style and not like when they choose to run, right? Like Jake Locker ran a little bit out of control, but reasonably fast enough, but like out of control, whereas Carson Wentz
think he's still faster than Wentz. Yeah, Carson Wentz, the way he kind of moves, like the way he moves laterally is very similar to Jake Locker's, where it's just kind of like chaos, but he's also like, I don't know, it's almost like watching a deer run, you know what I mean? It's kind of something weird like that, but where Jake Locker definitely had more of like a home run speed than Carson Wentz does. Like people think Carson Wentz might run like a 4.8, like that's not out of the question. So when people talk about like, yo, he's like got all these tools and things, he's a very fluid mover. He's not a very bursty mover. It's the same thing with like a Kyler Fackrell, the pass rusher from Utah State, who ended up working at linebacker a lot this week.
Yeah, that 25-year-old.
Yeah. Where people were like, we just don't see it, and it's like people are using the wrong words to describe him really, because people were like, yeah, he's not really a move player, and you're like, well, he's a former high school safety who said that he's more comfortable dropping back into coverage than he is rushing the passer, and he's a fluid guy. He's just not fast. Like he's just not a bursty guy. He's a very fluid athlete. He's just not a bursty athlete, and I think as draft analysts we don't do a good enough job of explaining what that means.
So that definitely does not sound like an edge rusher. That sounds like a stack linebacker, like a weak side on top of the 3 technique kind of linebacker. Does that seem about right for Fackrell?
Yeah, I thought so. This is the problem. So I didn't watch a lot of Fackrell's 2015, right? What I did see though was before, because I had agents hitting me up like back in 2013, right? And being like, look, you need to check this kid from Utah State. And I'm like, what? He's like a freaking sophomore. I'm going to watch a sophomore pass rusher from Utah State. And then I ended up watching I think it was the USC game. And I was like, oh, wow, he's Clay Matthews. I was like, oh, this is nuts. And then so he looked all of last season. And then this year he ended up playing again. And from what I saw, I mean, he looked the part moving back. He's just a tall dude. So you're not used to, you're not used to the coverage linebacker being a giant. You know what I mean? And that's kind of where he is. He's like 6'4", mid 240s. But I mean, I was talking to who was it, Dane Brugler, about this, and I was just kind of, I'm just moving around, following these defensive linemen and offensive linemen and stuff like that. And then once I see someone, I'm just like, oh, let me bend your ear on something. So I'm just kind of, shooting crap with them, asking him about anyone, near us. And I was like, well, what do you think about Fackrell? And he's like, I think he's a tight end. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, like, he's a fluid mover. He's not really a bursty guy, but he's kind of a big dude. I mean, he has the body of a tight end.
Is this kind of like how Eric Ebron's actually a defensive end?
Yeah. But I was talking to him about that, and I'm like, the more I started thinking about it, I'm like, there's no like matchup tight end in this class. You know what I mean? Because there's Hunter Henry from Arkansas, right? But Hunter Henry, this is what annoys the hell out of me about Packers fans, because Packer fans come up to me, right? And they're like, well, who's the tight end that we could take that could be a mismatch problem? Because Richard Rodgers, like, he's okay, but, he's not Jermichael Finley. And even when we had Jermichael Finley, we just bitched about having Jermichael Finley because Jermichael Finley wasn't good enough for us. Like, oh, okay, whatever. So I'm like, look, here's the thing. Like, Hunter Henry might be the only top 100 tight end in this draft, and he's going to run in, like, the 4.8s. He could just catch everything. Like, he's a very good feel for everything, and he can catch everything. But he's not a mismatch guy. The guy that people liked was that Vanek kid from Utah State or Ohio State, but he's the only other like threat to go in the top 100. After that, those are all day 3 picks. So if a guy like Fackrell decides he wants to come play tight end, I mean, I don't know what you do with that, because you're like, well, you're the best mover in this class, and it's not even really close. So I don't know. That was a weird thing. People saying like Oakman needs to move to tight end. I don't know. Oakman just needs to move to he needs to move to volleyball or something. I don't know.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the questions that we got that are obviously pretty Viking specific. So one thing, obviously, Vikings fans are huge. I guess advocates for is a big body wide receiver that can win contested catches. The Vikings have probably the worst contested catch core in the NFL. Stephon Diggs is probably the best contested catch receiver, and I'm not even sure he's an average contested catch passer. So with that in mind, they want these big bodies. They need guys who can like box out. Obviously, Josh Doxson comes to mind, but Iowa_Josh asks, is there a Carew bandwagon yet? Leonta Carew, I believe, from Rutgers. He's got great, hashtag metrics, but is there a bandwagon for this dude?
Yeah, people seem to like him. He's kind of weird because he has all the off-field stuff too, right? So no one really knows. So actually,
talk a little bit about that, because I'm not sure everyone is super familiar, and that Rutgers program is a mess.
Yeah, there's weird things happening there. Hold up, I'm gonna pull up what it says officially, so I don't act like an idiot when I try to explain it.
you mean like more than usual?
Yeah. So he ended his season on an injury, but that wasn't the only issue that he faced. So he had a domestic violence issue himself, right? Mm-hmm. That Rutgers ended up like slow playing for a while, and then they ended up bringing him back. And then there was like an issue with his mother and his girlfriend. So this is like the direct thing from when they played the Wazoo game early on in the season, whereas Rutgers senior receiver Leonce Carew's mother and girlfriend were charged for alleged involvement in players' altercation after the Washington State game.
So his mother and girlfriend were charged.
Yes. Okay. This was also when. So this is what the blurb says for that, right? So it goes: the saga gets stranger and sadder by the day. On September 12th, after the aforementioned upset loss to the Cougars, the alleged victim, Carew's ex, claimed she was confronted by Carew's girlfriend and a couple others. Carew allegedly body slammed the accuser into the concrete. Carew himself is facing a charge of simple assault under domestic violence, while his girlfriend and mom were hit with simple assault and disorderly conduct charges. So there's just like, man.
So it's not just that. So it's not just that he might have like a screwed up sense of priorities. It's that he might surround himself with people that NFL, front offices may not necessarily like too.
Yeah, and that's what we talk about with Robert Nkemdiche too, right? We're like, Robert Nkemdiche is a top 5 pick.
Is there something with his brother or something like that?
Dude, his brother's crazy. His brother was in the hospital. You got to remember that.
Yeah, that was him. Right. Whew.
That's where when people were like, Nkemdiche fell out of a 3-story building, and that doesn't happen with weed. Okay, his brother also allegedly was in the hospital for smoking spice. So that's where the whole Spice Nkemdiche just putting 2 and 2 together. That's where that started, where people were like, God damn, man. But the weird thing is Nkemdiche comes from a really good family.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's what I heard. I don't know, man. Things get kind of screwed up when you move to college. Okay, so let's combine the next part of Josh Bjork's question with Corey Strickland's question. So Josh asked, is there someone bigger, faster, / better jump ball ability than Diggs and Wright? Let's combine that question with the next one from Corey Strickland at Contract Corey. I would like to hear about why we should or shouldn't shoot for De'Runnya Wilson in the second. So talk a little bit about De'Runnya Wilson, and talk maybe just a little bit about receivers who have jump ball ability that might be able to win in the red zone.
I love De'Runnya Wilson. So De'Runnya Wilson is a guy who I've been a pretty big fan of since last year when I was able to watch him and Dak Prescott go at it.
Strong name.
Basically, the way that very strong name, both of them. So the thing is, the way that Mississippi State offense kind of functioned was basically if De'Runnya has a step on anyone, just throw it at him. He'll figure it out. And it was just here's where our talent is. Our talent is Dak Prescott and De'Runnya Wilson. So we're just gonna try to make you guys see each other as often as possible. De'Runnya Wilson very much if Kelvin Benjamin can go in the first round, I really don't see why De'Runnya Wilson can't. You know what I mean? He has more consistent hands, just giant body. Like I said, he's not gonna be a guy that can destroy someone, right? He's not gonna run a 4.40 and just gun past guys. He's not Calvin Johnson at his size, but at least he's Kelvin Benjamin with a higher floor, I think. I'm a pretty big fan of him on a relative scale.
That's pretty good, man.
The guys that I will ride for as far as the receivers are concerned, I like Laquan Treadwell. I like him. I like Sterling Shepard. I think Sterling Shepard very much he's Randall Cobb. There's not really any difference between him and Randall Cobb. And then I like Josh Doxson, as long as you're fine with whatever his injury recovery looks like.
Yeah, his wrist or whatever. Yeah, it sounds like it's not a big deal. So
the guys that I'd worry about are guys like Will Fuller and stuff like that, where I'm you're a sprinter. You're really fast. You're really fast, but you can't catch it all.
That's fair. I mean, I don't know, man. The Pittsburgh Steelers have been making some pretty good receivers out of those fast dudes who can't catch. So we'll see.
Right. It's freaking me out. I don't like it because the Packers used to be that team, and now we can't draft like any leader. Jeff Janis.
Maybe, man. What was that? His like 9th and 10th catch, 8th and 9th catch of the season.
He's trash, but he does just enough in like big moments to have him linger around for another couple years.
No, he's the perfect formula for a hashtag hype machine.
Like fantasy dynasty fantasy Twitter. Just oh my god.
No, they love him, and then just in general, like generic football fans love him because he's the scrappy white receiver. I mean, we've got our own Adam Thielen, probably not as athletic as Jeff Janis, but
the thing is, I don't understand why Packer fans need that. We already have Jordy Nelson, like and
hometown hero Jordan Harris.
Yeah, like we already have a guy in state, and then a guy who we have a kid from Wisconsin, right? We got a kid from a small school,
farm,
and then we got a kid from a farm who was a walk-on. Like, what are we doing here, man? Just trying to be a sports movie. Aaron Rodgers out here trying to function in
football, man. That's just Packers football. Them and John Kuhn, they'll bring you another ring.
Man.
Let's talk a little bit about safeties. This person wrote in like 4 days ago or 3 days ago. Has Darian Thompson cemented himself in the first round? Darian Thompson looked great in the game. I heard he had some really good practices this week in the Senior Bowl. I don't know, man. I haven't watched any of his Boise State games, but I've been hearing a lot of really good stuff about this guy. Do you know anything about him?
Yeah, he was actually one of the guys. So I usually tend to hit defensive backs and receivers last, right? Just because it's harder to get film on those guys early on. And the angles for it are horrible, so you have to have like 6 games to be able to watch like 2 games worth of like broadcast film of linemen compared to a defensive back, right? But I was able to catch probably like 6 or so Boise State games this year, and everyone had always talked about Correa, the pass rusher from Boise State. But the 2 guys who always looked like it to me were Darian Thompson. Even last year, I remember watching him in 2014 and being like, "Oh, he's a guy I need to remember." And my idiot ass just never sent a tweet out about it, so I can't retweet it, just bring it back up over and over again. Now it's just a thought that I had. Him, and then the running back who like now is a true junior, who had like. That kid is like Danny Woodhead. That kid caught like he must have caught like 1,000 yards out of the backfield, and he had like 20 rushing touchdowns. That kid's crazy. No one talk about him yet. I haven't sent a tweet about him yet, so you guys.
You guys sent a tweet out, man.
I got to do it. But yeah, Darian Thompson, very good. He was the one guy like. A lot of the guys who flash in these games, right, end up being like the strong safety types because those are the guys who come down in the box and make a big hit. And people like, wow. And it's like, Carl Joseph was on a blitz on that play. I'm sure, like, he was untouched on a blitz. I very much hope so that he could have hit that running back in open field. But Darian was the one guy who was like, he looked like he can cover and he could do everything. You know, he's kind of a bigger dude too. I know that like Chargers fans were freaking out about him and like they were like irrationally freaking out about him. I think KP was like, "Yo, trade down on the first." Kyle Posey, for those who don't, he worked for worked for SB Nation's San Diego Chargers site and did draft stuff. And he's okay. He's decently smart. He was like, "Yo, trade down to the first round and pick him as like Eric Weddle's replacement." And the more I think about it, I'm like, you know, he might be the best safety in this class. Like, people talk about Jalen Ramsey, but Jalen Ramsey doesn't have a defined role. That's my issue with Jalen Ramsey. Like, Darian Thompson, I think you can play him at free safety.
So not to compare the 2 players, but just to put the 2 roles together, do you think that he could play, and again, he doesn't seem to play like him, but do you think he could play the same role as Tyrann Mathieu?
Oh, wow. Jalen Ramsey?
Yeah, because that seems to be a fit for Jalen Ramsey.
Yeah, I think so. I think you just want to use him as much as possible. So that's not to get it like too deep into the draft world with this, right? But the pick that people kind of are confused on to like, what the hell is this team going to do, is Jacksonville at 5, right? Because no one knows what the hell. Because that's kind of where the tier ends, where it's like the big guys are Bosa and Tunsil, right? And then there's going to be a quarterback. So you don't know if Dallas is going to take a quarterback, and you don't know if Cleveland's going to take a quarterback. So that means Jacksonville's going to have the first pick of like kind of that next tier. But then Jacksonville's also the wild card team that took Blake Bortles third overall.
Right.
People. I know people who are like talking with Blake Bortles' agent on draft day, like that draft morning. And the smoke that the Bortles camp was trying to put out was like, yo, Arizona and Denver. Like, Arizona and Denver are the two teams that really want us. So, like, even like, Bortles' camp
even
was like,
even the agent had – wow, okay.
Yeah, they had no idea that was going to go down. So, I don't really know. But, like, the way Jacksonville very much wants to play a cover 3 scheme just based on defense, right? Like,
they absolutely do, right? But they need Earl Thomas.
You need an Earl Thomas or a Cam Chancellor or a Richard Sherman. You know, you need one of them, and you got none of them right now.
Right.
That was my big thing where I'm like, look, you guys have all this money. Like, at some point, you have to get a defensive building block. Because if you were hoping it was going to be Dante Fowler, I don't know what to tell you, man. Like, Dante Fowler isn't that. Like, like, very much what we got out of, like, Jabal Shurd this year, right? Where Jabal Shurd kind of was, like, he was, like, the sneaky signing who was, like, former second-round pick, was very talented, had early production in his career, and then the Cleveland Browns just kind of Cleveland Browned it, and the Patriots
took advantage of it.
Yeah, and he was like, kind of like, he wasn't a star, and he wasn't really a breakout guy, but they were like, for what you're getting paid, wow, the Patriots sure like got their money's worth. I think that's kind of what you're gonna get out of Fowler. But if you drafted Jabal Shurd third overall, your feelings about Jabal Shurd probably not the same. Probably not the same as what the Patriots are right now.
So you think that maybe the Jaguars could go after Jalen Ramsey and figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot of picks that make sense unless they want to take a shot at a guy like Ronnie Stanley or something like that, or if they're the team that gives Robert Kincaid. But
that would be hilarious.
And Duval, like, good Lord, man. But like they already had the Justin Blackman fiasco and stuff like that. That's why I don't know what happens with a guy like Medici, because he's kind of a fit in Jacksonville, right? He can play 3 technique. Here's the problem: they already had that Justin Blackman thing go down. I don't know if they want to do that. Then you could look at a team like San Francisco, and you're like, oh, you could play 5 technique in San Francisco, except for they just got rid of Aldon Smith. If they just got rid of Aldon Smith, they probably don't want to bring in a Robert Kincaid. But I don't know. San Francisco is also the team who fired Jim Harbaugh because he has a strong personality. They brought in Jim Tomsula, who, I mean, you'd say they beat expectations, right? They beat expectations under Tomsula. And then, after
minimal,
where it was like, so they got rid of Harbaugh because he had a strong personality. Then they hired Tomsula. Tomsula beat expectations, got fired after a year, and then now they hired Chip Kelly, who has a strong personality. I'm like, I don't know what's happening here at all. Just kind of seems like you guys are manic. You guys are just doing things to do things.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some other safeties that, because we got a little bit off track. That's my fault. Talk a little bit about other safeties the Vikings might be interested in. So Darian Thompson, evidently pretty talented. Other people that are grabbing people's attention, Vaughn Bell from Ohio State, Jeremy Cash, I think, from Duke. There's a couple of others. I know Sua Cravens is like a name that people are like throwing around to be, like Deion Buchanan or whatever. What are your thoughts on like an early-ish round safety for the Vikings potentially?
I don't know how much I love Jeremy Cash because he's more of like he plays like he plays like a linebacker on a free safety's body. I think it was Hank Jones from Big Cat Country who was talking about that. Who was like he just wants to kind of be aggressive and like just kind of hit stuff. Like he very much. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if at the Combine he tests like an elite safety, but when you watch him on the field, there's a reason why he transferred from Ohio State to Duke. It's because he probably couldn't see the field at Ohio State as a full-time starter. Who are some of the other? Bell, I didn't see Bell very much. I haven't gotten to him. I mean, he's an underclassman, so I just kind of I'm kicking that can for a while until I absolutely have to watch him. I've seen guys like Carl Joseph. Carl Joseph, I think he's going to be a pretty good guy in his role. Like, I think he's going to play special teams. I think he's going to play like more in the box, but I don't think he's Cam Chancellor by any means. Miles Killebrew is kind of interesting because he's a big dude. Like he's a big dude and he's faster than everyone. So if there's a guy who, people are excited about Jaron Kearse, right, from Clemson. about being like the next
until the national championship game, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think Miles Killebrew is more so like the next Cam, if there's going to be a Cam in this class, the Javon Curse, who literally can only play box safety. He's basically like a stretched out thin linebacker who doesn't know how to get into run fits. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with you. Like, you're undraftable. Man. I don't know why you declared a year early. You watch. Well, the thing, dude, he's a liability to you. He's a liability in every way because that run that people keep replaying of like Derrick Henry, right? That Derrick Henry where he just crosses the line of scrimmage and it's just a run between him and the free safety now. It seems like a lot of people didn't watch that UNC game, that ACC championship. Because if you watch the ACC championship, go ahead and go look up how many yards that those running backs down there in North Carolina got. Because it was a lot, and a lot of it's because of Javon Curtis, because he's not good at all. That's why I think it was Tony Pauline was like something about the other safety from Clemson. It was like some teams actually have him ahead, and I was like, oh, what? They have him drafted? Like, he's a 7th round pick? I don't know what to like. Javon Curtis, not a good football player. Sean Davis is kind of interesting. Sean Davis actually played cornerback in this game, and he was the guy who, I believe, on the first hit of the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, he had the first hit. He took out a tight end. Yeah,
he took out Vanette, who's like the only half-decent senior tight end there, and just kind of lifted his leg and like pile drove him into the ground. He's pretty solid. Outside of that, I haven't really seen anyone. I mean,
a lot of these guys, 6 names. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's safeties. Like safeties are like centers, where you're like, I hope there's 2 good ones. I hope there's 2 that are in the top 100 and like don't suck.
Fair enough.
We've like the issue with safeties in the NFL, right, is this is how I've had it explained to me. One, teams don't care, right? We got to remember that I believe it was this summer, people were, I think it was either a Bucky Brooks piece or it was a Daniel Jeremiah piece on NFL.com where they were talking about future Hall of Fame guys, right? And people were talking about Polamalu and things like that. And they had, unnamed executives, but still, I mean, I trust those guys as far as like sources and stuff go.
Yeah, in terms of
yeah, just in terms of being able to pull guys up and be like, hey, what are your thoughts? I'm not gonna put your name to it. I mean, I trust them. They had guys who were unnamed who were like, they're safeties. There shouldn't be safeties in the Hall of Fame. Like, it's a safety. Like, very much, this is like of the 22 starters on an NFL team. Unless you're playing with a fullback now, which no one does in the NFL, it seems like these are the 21st and 22nd. Like the NFL very much does not care about safety play, which seems weird because when you have a guy like Earl Thomas, that completely changes what you do as an offense.
No, it does seem weird. I kind of noticed that too. I was doing some research on like the amount of draft capital that teams will invest in the first 2 rounds at different positions. So the most draft capital, as you'd expect, gets spent actually not for quarterbacks but for tackles because there's twice as many of them. And then it's edge defenders, then defensive interior, then quarterbacks, then receivers, cornerbacks, linebackers, and this was hilarious to me. Then guards, and then safeties.
Yep.
And then the only thing that came after that, and this is only in the last 5 years, running backs, tight ends, and centers. And running backs I sort of expected. Centers I absolutely expected, and tight ends I was maybe not surprised by, but I hadn't thought of. But yeah, the NFL does not care about valuing safeties. It's actually kind of interesting to me that McCourty got as much money as he did, which I think $9.5 million. Earl Thomas got $11?
He got like 40, right?
Yeah,
I think he got 4 for 40 because that's the exact same deal that Sam Shields signed like a month later.
Yeah.
That's what's took out me, where you're talking about a guy who's the elite free safety in the NFL.
Like the top free safety like signs for like a good cornerback salary.
Yeah. That's why I don't know what you do with a guy like people are like, wow, Eric Weddle's about to hit the market. I'm like, I don't know. He's like gonna be 35 soon, right? Like Eric Weddle's gonna be old and he's a free safety, which means you have to have.
What if you could get him to play running back again? I wonder if that would increase his value.
Try to finesse that. So that was my point. So like the NFL very much doesn't care about safeties, and I don't know if I necessarily blame them because the second part is like. College football doesn't really care about safeties because the problem is who's the last first round safety that's hit? It's either Earl Thomas or Eric Berry, and they were drafted in 2011. That means these kids who are coming out of
Harrison Smith. Hello, come on, man.
Oh, was he? Yeah. Dang it.
Yeah, he's first round. Never mind. Pick number 22.
Never mind. Yeah. I'm an idiot. Yeah, I was about to make the point. I was like, there's redshirt seniors playing in this game who were graduating high school at that same time. Never mind. Continue. But yeah, college football, you just got to think about it this way. Like cornerback is a more important position than safety, right? I think it's fair to say that. And these kids coming out of high school want to play receiver more than they want to play defensive back. Okay, so now that these teams go from 2 receivers to going into 4 receivers, and now defensively you have to go from 2 cornerbacks to 4 cornerbacks. Safety's very, very low on the priority list of where you need to put your best athlete. So it just ends up being like
not only where athletes want to go, but also where coaches want to put athletes. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so that's sort of the safety landscape in general. August Zara asks at August_Zara asks, would like to hear your thoughts on the Sheldon Rankins. Already heard you talk about that. And Cody Whitehair guarding the game. Sounded like he performed pretty well in the game. It also sounded like he had a really good week of practices. You said you were watching a lot of the offensive linemen. Did Cody Whitehair, pop?
Yeah, so there were really only 3 guys that really popped as far as offensive linemen go. I mean, Jason Spriggs, the left tackle from Indiana, looked good, but he just looked good because he was a mover, and there weren't really pass rushers. Like, Jihad Ward was probably the second best pass rusher in this game, and Jihad Ward is like maybe a third, second round pick. Like, no one really knows because his tape is horrible. Other than that, like, Noah Spence is a top 10 guy, and then everyone else is like, oh yeah, you guys are gonna get drafted after the top 100. So it was like very much like the haves and have-nots. And he didn't go against Noah Spence until the actual game because they were on different teams. So it was like, I don't know what the hell to do with this. Right. So Jason Spriggs is very much a good mover. But as far as the offensive linemen are concerned, Jack Allen from Michigan State, he looked like everyone's little sister. But good Lord, can that kid anchor? Like, they moved. I saw some great minds. Yeah, he's nuts, man. Like, he was a guy who can absolutely. He was like just killing people at center at Michigan State. Played mostly guard because there was just so many damn centers in this game. And then there were times where Conklin went out for the Spartans where they decided we're gonna play Jack Allen at they're like, we're just gonna play Jack Allen at left tackle. And like, Jack Allen's 6'1".
Good.
That's crazy.
Lord.
Yeah, no, he's by far the smallest lineman, and he did well. Cody Whitehair very much looked the part up until the 3rd day of practice. The 3rd day of practice, he probably got beaten in the other 2 days combined. But I'm a huge Cody Whitehair guy. Like, I believe in my mock on Bleacher Report, which you guys should go read, which I wrote last week, which I gave Josh Doxson to the Minnesota Vikings because I'm a very nice person. I think I had Cody Whitehair going like 14th to the Eagles or whoever's drafting them. I also had Sheldon Rankins going 16th overall before anyone else did. Shouts to me for getting Sheldon Rankins takes up before.
Whatever, man. Charles is the Sheldon Rankins Queen Bee, man.
I know. He claimed it. But I had Sheldon Rankins and DJ Reader. That was my thing. I was also the guy who was on DJ Reader, who no one talked about until then. Well, let's talk about DJ Reader. All right, so DJ Reader, super weird background. So he's a senior captain from Clemson who didn't play the first half of the season because his father passed away. So the first game that he came back was that Miami game where Clemson didn't even go into the locker room at halftime. They just kind of chilled on the sideline because they were up like 48 or whatever. And that's really, if you want to go back and watch that, where Dabo's just yelling at guys on the sideline and the TV broadcast, like, they never left. They hung out here. So that was the game. I believe that was when, like, as much as people like to talk about that Kevin Dodd kid, right? And how, like, now he's magically much better than Carl Lawson, even though Carl Lawson's clearly the best pass rusher on that team. Hot take. Just got to get my takes in at like 100 miles an hour.
Hey, Dodd finished strong. That's all. That's all I got to put out there.
Dodd's production really didn't start happening until Reader caught on. But so Reader's a freak athlete for his size. But I didn't realize how large he was. So he measured in at 6'3" and 340 pounds. I guess people overheard things at the weigh-in where someone was like, "Oh wow, he lost 30 pounds." We were like, "He was playing at 370 pounds. He was playing at 370." But he's a big guy who I was super happy ended up here because I was like, man, because he got announced late too because someone got hurt, so he had to end up coming in and playing. I think maybe Buckner pulled out. Someone pulled out, so it opened up a spot for him. And I was just like, yes, can he do it? I mean, he's not Poe, right? He's not Dontari Poe, like freak athlete. But if you're looking for a guy who's like an explosive one technique, I think your job, like, you just go to Reader and you're like, I'll try to fix you, because he very much waistbender kind of guy. You saw it on the one-on-ones where he started to fold on day 2 and day 3 when guys figured out, I can lay on you. So he needs to work on like core strength and things like that. I think losing a little bit of weight will help him too. He doesn't necessarily need to play at 340 pounds.
Cool. Well, yeah. Well, Dontari Poe level 1 technique athlete is pretty rare. I mean, people who listen to this know that I've done like athleticism stuff at the combine. Dontari Poe, if you go all the way back to 1999, top 10 of all time in terms of weight-adjusted athleticism. Up there with Calvin Johnson, J.J. Watt, Vernon Davis. And that 400-pound guard, Brandon Brooks? I don't know. So one more quick Senior Bowl leader question from @SmithBrennan22, Brennan Smith. We already mentioned this a little bit with Jihad Ward, but any raw athletic pass rushers in the mold of Hunter or Griffin likely to be available late in the draft. And Hunter and Griffin were third-round picks, but maybe he's thinking late in the draft because the Vikings do have a lot of depth at defensive end. So athlete pass rushers besides Jihad Ward that might be available a little bit later. What do you got?
Bastard. All right. You're going to take the easy layup from me. One guy. So in this game specifically, Daddy Nicholas looked like he could pass rush in the game, but he was pretty horrible in person. Jihad Ward, I don't know.
Say 230 pounds?
Yeah, right. Like, you don't understand how bad he looked in practice. I don't understand who the guy who was on the Senior Bowl broadcast, because at practice, I mean, he was getting stonewalled by Spencer Drango, and Spencer Drango is like a guy who's gonna have to kick in the guard at the next level. And he would like Daddy.
You mean Outland Trophy finalist, 2-time All-American Spencer Drango? That guy?
All right, you can keep that noise. Y'all can have that. Y'all can have that. Yeah, I mean, just going through the guys who were listed at defensive end, like Lawrence Thomas from Michigan State. He was a guy that everyone looked around at each other and like, why the hell isn't he playing defensive tackle? Why is he trying to play DN? Carl Nassib wasn't too interesting. I mean, he's kind of a hustle guy. He's a weird athlete, right? He's like the Trent Murphy type of athlete where he's fluid but not explosive. But he's also like, he stumbles over his own feet when he's like unblocked. Like his ability to like gather himself and like get with balance. Like, you got to remember, he's also a walk-on. Like, a lot of these guys who people are like, you know, scrappy, everything like that, and they're like former walk-on. They're probably walk-ons for a reason. Like guys like Carl Nassib, guys like Jack Conklin from Michigan State, the left tackle. They were probably walk-ons because they were horrible athletes. And then like Nassib's throwing a bunch of weight on himself. I don't know if he's just trying to catch his feet, but he's also he's like almost 6'7". Like I think he's a quarter inch away from 6'7". So he's a guy that you're like, maybe we could throw 30 more pounds on you and make you make you a 5 technique. But then you're like, you've already put on like 50 pounds from where you were in high school. Fanaiko, we already talked about. I mean, he's a pretty smart rusher. But like that, it's the same thing with Bronson, but smart doesn't get you drafted in the first 2 rounds. And I don't think those guys are really like the explosive type either. Sean Oakland's just kind of an idiot. Like, he's just, I don't know what to do with him, man.
Yeah.
He, below the wings, he looks like Larry Fitzgerald. No, pause, wild pause on that. And then Charles Tapper. Charles Tapper's, if I had to pick another guy, I'd probably go with Charles Tapper. Because Charles Tapper's kind of a thick dude who's kind of like stout. But he's very much a good athlete, and he's a pretty explosive for his size, because he's almost like 280 or something. I think he was playing in the 280s at Oklahoma. And you got to remember, Charles Tapper was a guy who, as a freshman and sophomore, was looking like, holy crap, this guy's going to be a future first-round pick. Like, he chased Amari Cooper down from behind in the Sugar Bowl. You know, people forget this. Yeah, and he was a big dude too.
So then why is he what happened?
3-4, and they played him as like the frog squat 5 technique.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're like, hey,
wait,
your only real bonus is athleticism. We're going to take that away completely. So he went from being like a borderline 10-sack guy as in a 4-3 to being like a 5-tackle guy in the 3-4. He almost declared after his junior year and then decided to come back. And then, like, at the end of this year, they started freeing him up a little bit where they would play him at 6. and he ran down like Shock Linwood, the running back from Baylor, from behind. So he was a guy that I was like, coming into this week, I was like, oh, that's the guy I need to pay attention to. I caught him a lot day one, and then after that, I don't know what happened. He flashed a little on day one, but then after that, I think it was like, so I don't know if he's going to be like just try to reinvent his body even more and hope for the combine. As far as there were a couple linebackers who were kind of interesting, but like Jordan Jenkins is weird because he's not good or bad at anything, and he gets a lot of tackles and he's an effort guy, but he's like also kind of explosive. Like for a guy who's like 6'2" and 260 pounds, like he can chase down the back of a play. But he's not like will linebacker or anything, you know what I mean? So he's more of like a kind of like below average upside 3-4 outside linebacker. Then Reggie Ragland was getting into it too. I think Reggie Ragland, he's going to end up being a sandbacker at the next level.
Yeah.
Of all these guys, I think, you know, he's kind of been talked about in different ways. I think he's probably like a Sam linebacker who you get value in and taking top 50, but probably not top 25. And then if there was any other guy, I mean, Kyler Fackrell from Utah State, like I said, I mean, he's a fluid athlete, not a bursty athlete, kind of like Trent Murphy mold. Can like at least run in the straight line on like Carl Nassib. Joshua Perry was a guy who I thought was going to be interesting, but he ended up leaving after the first day, so I didn't really get a good look at him.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So one more question before we get into the Viking-specific part of the podcast, which you can stay for if you want. I don't really care.
I think I need a nap. I think that's my issue. I need a nap. I gotta recover from the Senior Bowl. It's been a long week, man.
I'll get this last question in then. It's back to the wide receiver stuff. So James Reed wrote in via email. This is only my second year scouting college prospects through game film via draftbreakdown.com, so I realize my analysis could be very prone to error, but I can't figure out why most draft experts have such a large ranking gap between Laquan Treadwell and Josh Doxson, or anyone else. Treadwell's like top 6 and like CBS and stuff like that. So Treadwell is almost always ranked as a top 10 pick, whereas Doxson can be found anywhere from the late first to late second round. The only significant advantages I can find with Treadwell are weight and supposed level of competition SEC versus Big 12. So I can't understand why there's such a huge gap in the rankings, considering that, in my amateur scouting opinion, Doxson looks like a better receiver. So what do you have, Justice?
I'll say that he's pretty much right. My issue is like, so who is the best cornerback from the Big 12? Because that kid from Houston is better than anyone from the Big 12. I'm trying to search who the top guy is. It's Xavier Howard is the top-rated Big 12 cornerback on NFL Draft Scout, and then it's Zach Sanchez who's 13th from Oklahoma. Zach Sanchez is like 5'9" or something like that. You got to remember the Big 12 is the same conference that had Justin Gilbert as like by far the best cornerback. It's like Justin Gilbert's basically a god.
And they also have Jason Verrett though. That dude was pretty good.
Yeah. That's true. But so the issue with the way the Big 12 is basically the way defensive backs play in the Big 12 is just scared, frightened. They're just like, we need to play quarters and exclusively quarters, and that's it. So there's a bunch of stuff like allowed underneath. I would say that if there's anything, it's probably more their age than anything else between Treadwell and Doxson. Because
Treadwell's like 20 years old, right?
Well, and Treadwell's been like a known commodity since high school. Like everyone's always been like, he's gonna be the guy. Like he's always gonna be the guy. Or Doxson now is like, he's gonna get labeled as overaged because he's a redshirt senior. I don't know how old he is, but I know he's a redshirt senior.
23.
Plus he's overcoming an injury. I don't know. I like Doxson. I told you guys right at the beginning of or earlier in the podcast. Where there's like 4 receivers that I ride for, and Doxson's one of them. Whoever's drafting Treadwell probably isn't getting value on Treadwell, and whoever's drafting Doxson is probably going to get pretty good value on Doxson. But I don't know. It's probably more of just age than anything else. I like both of them. I mean, I think Treadwell's probably he's like Dez. If Dez stumbled running his 40 time or something like that, right? So I don't think Treadwell's going to run a 4.7 or whatever. Some people are saying.
Yeah, that was the rumor that he was going to run a 4.7.
Matt Miller said 4.7. I'm not sure if it's going to be that low. I think he's probably going to run in the 4.5s. and then I don't know what we're gonna do with that, because we're gonna be like, well, we were already overcorrected on a 4.7, but we can't praise a receiver for running a 4.5. So we're just getting like, I don't know. Draft Twitter gets themselves in a weird spot sometimes.
Just
Josh
in general,
Johnson reminds me of like Allen.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like both of these guys.
All right, fair enough. I mean, but there is like such a huge gap, right? And like you said, there's like, I've seen stuff where he's round 2, he's round 2 to 3, he's round 1 to 2, and Laquan Treadwell's always been sort of top 10. So you've got age, you've got weight, and you've got like level of competition. But it sounds like even though age may be part of it, metrics Twitter is probably going to like Doxson a lot more. He's got a greater market share of yards. He's not like a burner or anything, but he's going to come up with a better combine than Laquan Treadwell. And Laquan Treadwell only had 26% of his team's yards in the final year, whereas for a phenom receiver, according to this article I have from RotoViz, a person of his age should produce around a 33% market share of his yards. So that's actually a huge difference in sort of these metrics. So do you think that these metrics, like in this case, are probably pretty off? Like I know you said you like Doxson, but in this case, it seems like the metrics will probably favor Doxson by a lot, and I don't know if all of those are a result of like the different systems that they play in, because market share for the most part does do a pretty good job correcting for a system. Do you is that like a worry, do you think?
I think it helps to put into context. Like if things stand out in that, then you have to go back and look. I think the difference between that, if you go back and watch, it really does end up being like level of competition, because you'll have like Treadwell end up beating guys like Vernon Hargraves and things like that. You know what I mean? But I'm looking at what their rankings are on Play the Draft right now, which is a pretty good. It's a pretty good indicator of like how kind of
it's like a market system for the draft. Yeah.
Just kind of like a composite score, almost like how 24/7 is with like recruiting and stuff. But I don't follow that because I don't stock 16-year-olds. Laquan Treadwell's stock right now, FRX rating, not stock, is 7th overall, right, which makes sense because I think Baltimore drafts 6th. And then Doxson's though is 37.8. No, I think he's better than that. See, I think it's more that Doxson's better than he's being given credit for than like Treadwell's worse than what he's being given credit for. I think that's more of it than anything else, because I think where guys talk about defensive linemen like Jerron Reed and stuff like that, and they talk about pass rushers like Kevin Dodd, like those are tiers behind Josh Doxson for me.
Sure, that makes sense. All right, so that's like sort of the last question. Is there anything you want to plug besides that, mock draft that you put out? Is there any other articles I should like link in the show notes that you want people to
if you want to link the Wentz one, the Wentz one came up.
Yeah, I'll do that again.
Yeah,
I linked it last week,
that,
but yeah.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Other than that,
it's a good piece. I hate NDSU. Is perfect.
Yeah, right, they're going crazy. I can't remember who someone was tweeting about Carson Wentz, and they're like in his mentions, and they're like, "What the hell?" They tweeted at like a former player or something. God. Yeah, I
hate that.
4-5 national championships in a row doesn't matter. Like this is why you write, and you've never played. And it was like someone who had like Super Bowl rings or something. It's like, you guys are idiots, man. Like I told you, right? I was in their mentions, or they were in my mentions talking about that, because like Bison Nation retweeted it. BisonNation.net or whatever the hell it's called retweeted it, and I was like, oh no. Huh?
I think it's .info actually.
Is it .info? Good lord. Yeah, so they retweeted it, and then someone was like, yeah. It was like some North Dakota fan or like some South Dakota State fan, and was like, yeah, they're pretty nuts, huh? Because my tweet was like, yo, these NDSU guys are freaking crazy. They're already leaving like thousands of comments on this damn Bleacher Report article. They're like, yeah, they're pretty crazy. Like they think they can compete with Bama, and then like instantly it was like 18 guys, and like that's Sioux bias. That's some Sioux bias right there. Just like time and place. We just need a shot. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? I can't deal with them, man. They're crazy.
So good.
They're crazy.
That's so good.
And like Marcus Williams Island is a thing now. Like he's actually half decent, so you like actually can't tell.
Yeah, it's him.
Like no.
Do you know if Billy Turner's any good right now?
I don't think he is, because I think they moved Pouncey from center to guard because they didn't want to play him, right?
I think so. Who do they have at? Man, I have no idea what's going on with Billy Turner or the Dolphins actually.
I think he played a little bit, and he was like very, very bad because we gave Sully shit about it. Like, this is the kid you wrote for. His handle used to be O-line breakdown or whatever, and we're like, O-line breakdown. This is the kid you wrote for, you idiot. Yeah. No, I like Billy Turner though. Billy Turner was pretty good coming out of school. He's just strong as hell.
Do a podcast. It'll be my first time flying solo. It's be kind of fun.
All right, but you could do it, Cowherd. Arif.
Oh God!
Got it.
No. Oh God! I'm gonna kill myself if we keep doing that. All right, so that was Justis Mosqueda, and I've got a little bit of a mailbag to cover, as well as a couple of other bits of Vikings news. Not a bunch of it, but I won't have a host with me, as you heard. So this might be a little bit rambly. It might be a little bit ranty. And it might not be as structured as we're used to. So hopefully this will still be interesting, even if we don't have Dusty or James to reel me in. But I think sort of the biggest question when you step away from the draft for the Vikings in general is just, Pat Shurmur. We didn't talk about him a lot on the show. And the announcement for him to be the tight ends coach was kind of surprising. One of the reasons that was surprising, of course, is that Pat Shurmur was potentially going to interview with the Los Angeles Rams to be either their offensive coordinator or their passing coordinator. Both positions in title are significantly above a position coach, like tight end coach. And I think that that's maybe telling about, sort of maybe the kind of pull that Mike Zimmer has, or telling about, maybe the role that he'll be promised in the long term, given, the potential for Norv Turner to retire. I think his contract runs out. Norv Turner's contract runs out at the end of 2016. If not, it obviously runs out at the end of 2017. And Norv Turner's kind of getting up there in age. I think he's 59 right now. So the question is, Pat Shurmur, who's only 50, which is pretty young in coaching terms, maybe promised an offensive coordinator position in the future. That's kind of the only situation where I could see that Shurmur would be, incented by like future positions, because I don't think they would lame duck their own coach and plan to fire Norv Turner in favor of Pat Shurmur, especially because Pat Shurmur, outside of his Philadelphia years, has actually been a pretty poor offensive coordinator. But he has been a pretty good, quarterbacks coach, and he's coached Donovan McNabb up. He was present for Bradford's best year, and he's basically a quarterbacks coach, even though they technically had another person as the quarterbacks coach in Philadelphia. And he was there for Bradford's best year. And there's at least one other quarterback whose development that he oversaw that he actually did a pretty good job with. So there's some possibility that maybe he could be involved in the quarterback planning. And a lot of people are asking, like, will he be involved in coaching Teddy? And I think the answer to that is actually a pretty resounding no. And the reason for that in my head is because, A, you don't really want to cross streams when it comes to coaching the mechanics of the most important player on your team. You don't want to send mixed signals, and you don't want to reduce the authority of your quarterback's coach. Now, I know that I just said that happened in Philadelphia, but as a passing game coordinator in Philadelphia, he did actually have more, at least authority by title, over the quarterback's coach there. Here he doesn't, and in fact, he would be theoretically lower on the totem pole than Scott Turner. But beyond that, if he has like alternative like ideas for how to coach a quarterback, I mean, you could really screw up development. Beyond that, tight end coach is like a full-time job. I've talked to players throughout the years of training camp about, whether or not it makes sense for them to talk, really quickly with another coach, about their position roles. Like, for example, Red Ellison as a tight end works with the tight ends coach, but he plays from the fullback position a lot. And I was wondering if, he talked to, at the time, Jerome Felton or the running backs coach about blocking technique. And he said he never really did that. The coaches tend to stay in their own lanes. And it's a full-time job. You have to break down, sort of mismatches. You have to do your own part of the game planning every week, and you have to do all the technique coaching and the position-specific coaching that's involved. So I don't think he'll actually be involved with Teddy, at least in the short term. In the long term, I have no idea what's up with that. But that's sort of my thoughts in regards to Pat Shurmur. Who knows, right? If this will end up playing a significant role in the future, but I think in the short term, he's not. And I think we're going to get a bunch of questions about that, over the course of the offseason and his role. I think Mike Zimmer's already addressed his role, that he's not going to be working with Teddy. And I think for the most part that we can trust that right now. From there, I think actually it just makes sense to go directly to the mailbag. There's a lot of long email questions, of course, that people keep sending them in. Again, that's northcodepodcast at gmail.com. Please keep sending them in. They've got some great questions. We've neglected some of them, so we brought a couple of the ones that we've had to neglect up, and hopefully I've caught them all. I don't know if I did catch them all, but hopefully I caught them all. So the first question that I'm going to answer is actually about another potential head coach, Voltron. Remember, we now have 4 head coaches on the coaching staff. That's Mike Zimmer, Norv Turner, Pat Shurmur, and oh man, my head is blanking right now. Oh, the offensive line coach, Tony Sparano. So all 4 of them have, offensive head coaching experience. In order to get a Voltron, you need 5. So Nathan via email writes in, Mike Smith would complete the head coach Voltron. Now, what position would you use him in? That's going to be kind of tough. He's been a defensive coach his entire life. He's been a defensive line coach. He's been a linebackers coach, and a defensive coordinator. The defensive line coach, I think that there could potentially be, I'm not saying that the defensive line is coached poorly. Obviously, they're doing pretty well. But I think that there's probably an opening because if I remember correctly, Andre Patterson, the former defensive line coach from last year, has left the Vikings for another job. I'm looking it up really quickly right now. But I suppose in theory, Mike Smith could be the defensive line coach, or he could replace George Edwards as defensive coordinator if George Edwards gets hired somewhere. But that's probably not going to happen. And I don't see the Vikings firing, George Edwards for no reason. But let's see. I'm taking a look. Andre Patterson's still the defensive line coach, so probably couldn't do that. Linebackers coach is Adam Zimmer. You could probably move him anywhere you want. The linebackers coaching has been excellent, though, so I don't really see a spot, for Mike Smith if you really, really wanted to complete that Voltron, unless, as defensive coordinator, which actually would not be a bad job for him. There's a reason that he got a head coaching job. It's because he's been a decent, not great, but decent defensive coordinator, and he's had some really good experiences in Baltimore being a defensive line coach and a defensive coach. Did some pretty good work in college, too, as a defensive coach. So that's probably what you're going to get for Voltron. Beyond that, I think we got a bunch of questions about off-season plans, about wide receivers, about tackles and stuff like that. Hopefully I can hit them all out efficiently because I'm not so sure that this podcast is as exciting with one person instead of 2 people. But we'll get to the first one. Alex Jury via email says, off-season plans project us to make moves at wide receivers unless we roster 10 of them. Who is packing their bags? Everyone talks about giving Teddy the tools that he needs and bringing in new weapons. How about giving him a chance to build some chemistry with the wide receivers he has, specifically Mike Wallace? And I think that's a pretty good question. We've seen instances where a wide receiver sort of in the second year of a system has flourished. There's sort of countless examples of that. And I think that, it kind of makes sense. I think Mike Wallace took some time to get going in Pittsburgh, but he's a 3rd-round pick, so maybe that doesn't really count. Miami, he did have 10 touchdowns in his second year, but it's not like he really, really got going. Mike Zimmer seems to love him, though, so it is possible that he could develop more chemistry. I think the issue with Mike Wallace, though, and I've mentioned this on the podcast a couple of times, is that he seemed to lose focus over the season. He had more focus drops. He had a lot of issues with, running crisp routes at the end of the year as opposed to the beginning of the year. And I don't know that this isn't an endemic quality of Mike Wallace. I don't know if that he can concentrate his way through it over the course of a full season. So I don't know if this is, correctable and something that you can get out of him, especially for $11.5 million, which I believe is his cap hit this year. So it is possible, and you have to question, if you add a wide receiver, who do you lose? Right now, the Vikings do have, 6 wide receivers. You've got, Mike Wallace and Charles Johnson and Jarius Wright and Stephon Diggs and Cordero Patterson, if you want to call him a receiver. And it's unlikely, although it has happened in the past where Norv Turner has rostered 7 receivers, it's unlikely that you'll get 7 receivers. So in theory, if you add a wide receiver, you probably have to lose one. And I think Mike Wallace is probably that person. You could, in theory, lose Charles Johnson. He's 26 or 27. He's a lot older than a lot of people think. And so his development curve might not be going as well as you'd hope. But I think that Johnson has more developmental upside. He could probably do more for you than Mike Wallace. Obviously he has to do a better job winning contested catches. He has to do a better job just getting open and getting separation. But I think that he's the guy you can lose. Everyone loves Adam Thielen. He's top 5 player for the Vikings anyway on the special teams unit. And he provides obviously a lot of value. He's a pretty decent, 5th receiver, but you could lose him in favor of let's say a Laquan Treadwell or something like that. But I think the most likely person to lose is Mike Wallace. And I think that you give Teddy a chance to build chemistry with the wide receivers that he already has that are not Mike Wallace, Charles Johnson, Jarius Wright, Adam Thielen, and a new guy, because I doubt that whatever guy you get in the first or second round is more likely than not to be worse than Mike Wallace. And I think that's a big part of the calculation. The next question comes from Bill Armstrong via email. How important is offensive line play to an NFL team's success? We're all familiar with the old trope. Football games are won in the trenches. However, there are plenty of successful teams with mediocre O-lines and plenty of mediocre teams with great O-lines. According to Pro Football Focus rankings released in November, Dallas, Cleveland, and Atlanta had the 3 best O-lines in the league. At the time, Denver was 16th, New England was 18th, and Seattle was dead last. Minnesota was ranked 14th at the time, yet everyone seems to acknowledge that Minnesota's O-line play is a major reason why their passing offense was so woeful this year. What gives? Obviously, November PFF rankings are a bit dated at this point, but I've seen plenty of other articles essentially saying the same thing. Do we overvalue offensive lines? Can't quarterback play, running back play, and schemes make up for the O-line deficiencies? I think that's a great question, Bill. One of the things that when you're building a roster, you've got construction for your rosters, you have to figure out how your players interact with each other, whether or not they can make up for each other and stuff like that. And I think that when you talk about things like offensive lines and winning in the trenches, obviously there's 2 parts to that. You have a defensive line and an offensive line. And winning in the trenches, there's already 2 parts to playing sort of on the offensive line, this pass protection and run blocking. I think there's a pretty good point here about how, the divisional teams, Denver, New England, maybe not divisional team, wildcard team, a divisional team, Seattle. And then obviously you could talk a little bit about the Packers, who had a pretty bad O-line, but they did, make it into the playoffs. They made it decently far. Everyone basically but Carolina actually had a pretty poor offensive line in terms of pass protection. And so I think that's a good thing to bring up. But I think there's one sort of additional caveat. I think this year has actually been worse for offensive line protection than nearly every other year. And if you wanted to use Pro Football Focus as your referent, the bottom 5 offensive lines this year by Pro Football Focus's pass blocking efficiency rankings or by the grades have all been worse than all the other years that they've had, going all the way back to 2007. And so, saying that like, hey, and I think that's kind of true. If you added up all of the offensive line grades, they would be worse going back all the way to 2007. So saying, you've got Denver 16th, New England 18th, Seattle dead last, it's not like the people they're competing against are very good either, and that kind of deadens the whole thing. When you take a look at previous Super Bowls, the only sort of bad offensive line in terms of pressure, Seattle, which, again, a great example for the kind of quarterback that you might need in that situation. But Denver's offensive line, while it wasn't good, did a pretty good job preventing pressure from showing. New England's offensive line this year is pretty bad, but last year was actually pretty good. And overall, a lot of the teams that have been doing well over the past couple of years, and you could take a look at the Ravens, you could take a look at the 49ers when they showed up, they've all had pretty good offensive lines. Now, whether or not they had the best offensive line, that's a little bit different. It's not sort of the same level of importance as like a quarterback like Tom Brady. So, yeah, I think that they are pretty important. I think, Bill, that there's something to what you're saying in terms of how we tend to overvalue it a bit. And I think it kind of also depends on the quarterback that you have and the running back that you had. Obviously, Adrian Peterson in his prime did a pretty good job, maybe not hiding his offensive line, but making them look better than they were in terms of production on the field. I think that you can evaluate beyond that. But I think that just in terms of overcoming the play of those around you, a running back like Adrian Peterson can do that. Now, we're not going to have a running back like Adrian Peterson's, 2012, 2013 next year or going forward, not because we want to have Adrian Peterson next year, obviously, but because he's not the same person, that he was in 2011, 2012, 2013. And whether or not he has the ability to overcome offensive line play, I think this year is a pretty good example of how he has significantly less of an ability to do that, because he didn't really do that much this year. He did produce more than an average running back in that situation would. But I think just in general, we're getting diminishing returns on having a running back that can do that. Now, Jerick McKinnon, I think he's pretty good. I think that he has that capability in him. We're not going to see that for a little bit, and I'd like to give him as much help as possible. For a quarterback, I think to some extent scheme can help. I think that, Peyton Manning's scheme did a pretty good job always kind of hiding the skill level of the offensive line. I mean, remember, Charles Johnson was a left tackle for Peyton Manning for a while, and I think he was either the left guard or left tackle in the 2006 Super Bowl run that they had. And you can hide a lot of those things with how quickly Peyton Manning and, to some extent, obviously Tom Brady, get rid of the ball. The other end of the spectrum is Russell Wilson, who makes their offensive line look worse given how long he holds onto the ball, how much he's willing to scramble. And it's already bad offensive line. I don't think Wilson's the reason that they look bad. But, he does make them look a little bit worse. And he has the ability to overcome that with his, extraordinary athletic talent, his feel for the game, and his feel for where players are and how to avoid them and stuff like that. When we saw, a pretty great firsthand example of that. So, to some extent, I mean, there's two different kinds of quarterbacks that, could do that. Cam Newton is maybe a third type, although he doesn't really need to do that this year because of how well that offensive line is playing. And you can do that, but I think that a lot of good quarterback play comes from having time in the pocket, and you can make the receivers look better too because they've got more time to get open and stuff like that. And so I think it kind of depends on where you are in terms of running back and quarterback, and what kind of offensive line you want. Because I think that Derek Carr wouldn't have looked nearly as good this year, not nearly as good, if it wasn't for a combination of a short passing scheme with Musgrave and a really good performing offensive line with Gabe Jackson, Donald Penn, and Wisniewski and stuff like that. So I think that a lot of quarterbacks, especially young quarterbacks, will look a lot better and probably develop better when they have a better offensive line. And I think that it depends on the kind of quarterback that you have and the kind of scheme that you run in terms of the offensive line and how important they are. And I think the Vikings should adjust their scheme to make things easier on the offensive line. But I think at the end of the day, the way that the scheme runs, I think just generally you're going to want a better offensive line. And so to that extent, the fact that they've got a young quarterback, maybe he holds onto the ball a little bit too much, and maybe the scheme kind of requires a little bit more of them. I think that the Vikings' needs for offensive line, all other things being equal compared to other teams, is more than most teams in order to get to that point. So I think it's a good question, but I think it's kind of a nuanced answer. Jeff via email asks, this is Jeff in Tokyo, who enjoys your writing. Thank you, Jeff. I would like to ask you what you think going forward about TJ Clemmings. A, did you think he improved much over the last 3 to 4 games? Not necessarily that he became good, just did he go from total garbage to rather mediocre? To that first question, I think, yes, I think that he did improve. And I think that your characterization is correct, that he improved from maybe the worst or one of the worst offensive tackles in the league to just a pretty bad offensive tackle, which that's not surprising to me, and I don't think that's kind of an insult to Clemmings given where he was. And so, that's fine. B, more importantly, do you think that with instruction and valuable lessons of a year of torment starting, can he in a year or two become a competent to even good starting tackle or guard? And I think he can. My opinion of TJ Clemmings basically hasn't changed since he was drafted. Him playing well would have been the only surprise to me because I didn't think that he would play well in his first year. He's only played offensive tackle for 2 years. He showed a lot of issues in terms of what you want in a starting NFL tackle when he was playing at Pitt. And those showed. And I think that he's improved, and that's a good thing. And I think that that's the kind of thing that you're looking for. We've seen this happen with offensive tackles in the past. I mean, Bobby Massey is a really good example in Arizona of an offensive tackle who started off his career really, really poorly, and then he improved. I think Jake Matthews is another great example of an offensive tackle who in his rookie year played extremely poorly. He was really bad. And it helps that, from the second year on, he had Mike Tice, but Jake Matthews is another example of an offensive lineman who improved pretty significantly. And then actually in Minnesota, we actually have a great example. Michael Harris, when he was an undrafted free agent, he was forced to start in San Diego because they had, just like they did this year, a ton of offensive line injuries, and he was forced to play right tackle. He was worse than TJ Clemmings, probably. It's difficult to tell because, I don't remember watching a ton of Michael Harris except, immediately after the Vikings grabbed him off of waivers. But he played pretty poorly. He's an excellent guard right now. And he has a tackle's body too, right? He's got really long arms. He's a tall person. And, Mike Zimmer even mentioned earlier in camp that Clemmings, when they tried to move him to tackle, they had him compete at tackle a little bit, or at guard, sorry. They had him compete at guard a little bit. And, I mean, his arms were just too long, and he didn't have the ability to react in a tight space as quickly as he needed to. So there's a lot of examples, actually, of tackles playing poorly. And I mean at the bottom of the rankings. Bobby Massey was one of the worst his rookie year. Jake Matthews was one of the worst his rookie year. Michael Harris was one of the worst his rookie year. TJ Clemmings, one of the worst his rookie year. A lot of examples of tackles improving significantly. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that if you're bad, you will become good. I don't think anyone thinks that. But I think that, if this is what you expected, this really shouldn't change your expectations of him. So I think that he was a great pick at number 4, and I think that the Vikings are going to keep him 3 to 4 years. And that third or fourth year is going to be pretty make or break for him, and it's going to be pretty exciting to see what happens when he takes over for Phil Lodeholt, I think, in the long run. This year of torment, maybe it was useful. Maybe it helped. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it sort of reinforced bad habits, because that can happen too. But I definitely would not rule it out. Let's see. Max McCormick at Max Storms, without the first S, but with the second S. At Max Storms 1 asks, what could have led to Teddy's mechanics getting worse in year 2? How does weight room factor in? Obviously, you can't count on it. Are you hoping for Fashion to become a legit guard based on training camp, other observations? So that's 2 different questions. So the first one's about Teddy. The second one's about Isom Fashion, a great cook who also happens to play guard and used to play defensive tackle for the Vikings. So Teddy's mechanics, this has been a huge talking point, especially after a broadcaster, might have been Troy Aikman, might have been Phil Simms, talked a lot about how Teddy's elbow dropped. That was a big problem with Tebow. That's a problem that we actually saw in the Senior Bowl today with, I think, Jacob Coker today as of this recording. The elbow dropping is an issue in terms of, precision and controlling, sort of the amount of velocity that you have on the ball, and it hurts accuracy. It's not an issue that he had at Louisville. And just mechanically overall, Teddy did a poor job. His weight transfer with his feet was poor. His interceptions, some of them happened with an uneven base and bad balance. Sometimes he's leaning back. There's a lot of mechanical problems that he had in his second year. Now, Mike Zimmer says that he didn't actually see that many problems in terms of his mechanics. But I think that regardless of what Zimmer says, I think it's pretty clear that his final year at Louisville, he had better mechanics than he does in his final game with the Vikings against the Seahawks, or in the final stretch for the Vikings and the Seahawks. Now, I think that there's a couple of reasons for that. I think one of them is that the Vikings have been consistently trying to change his throwing motion to be quicker and potentially be stronger, more accurate, kind of the same way that the Packers did with Aaron Rodgers while he was sitting on the bench. That took 4 years. Maybe it only took 3. Maybe it only took 2 because we don't have much evidence the other way around. But that took some time, and we saw sort of the benefits of it. But it might have helped that Aaron Rodgers didn't play in games, and like I was talking with TJ Clemmings, might have helped that he didn't cement those bad habits in, because that's actually probably one of the issues with Tim Tebow. If the Broncos were able to, and who knows if this is ultimately true, but if the Broncos were able to not have to play him in the first couple of years and just work on his mechanics for 4 years, maybe he wouldn't have ingrained the poor mechanics that he showed late in the season or under pressure with the Broncos. And maybe potentially with Teddy. But the thing is, what Teddy reverts to, it's like kind of weird. It's kind of unusual. What Teddy would revert to, you'd think, would be the mechanics that he showed for 3 years at Louisville, or to some extent early on with the Vikings, not to a bad set of mechanics. So I don't think that there's an issue with a regression of his mechanics, but I'm a little bit concerned about that development. Now, as to whether or not the weight room matters, it might. I don't think that it matters too much, because you've still got sort of the neurological functions that comprise muscle memory, but it could have an impact. I'm not a kinesiologist or whatever you want to call it. And the second question he asked was about Isom Fashion, about him becoming a legit guard. I doubt it, but I like the experiment. I like the try, and he seems fully committed to it. There were some times in training camp where he flashed, but for the most part, he didn't look very good. But I'm cheering for him because I like him. I've talked to him a lot, and he's a super nice guy. So that's kind of the long and the short of it. There's not really much evidence one way or the other. Racer K at Racercraft asks, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would Arif rate the offseason coaching moves? I don't know, like a 7. Nothing blows me out of the water in terms of the coaching moves. Pat Shurmur was obviously an interesting one. Tony Sperano was probably a required one. Nothing sort of home runny, not like Mike Tice or anything like that at offensive line, but nothing that I'm opposed to. So I think better than, if 5 is average, right? Better than a 5, probably better than a 6, but nothing that was overwhelmingly amazing or anything like that. Maybe I'll take a look at how good tight ends were under Pat Shurmur, but I think that might be kind of a useless exercise at this point, given how long ago he was the tight ends coach. Chance Hoekstra asks, I know it's early, but is there a player coming into the draft that will be worth trading up into the teens for? Potentially. The Vikings are not huge into trading up into the teens. They're huge into trading at the bottom of the first round. That player might be Laquan Treadwell. We talked a lot about that with Justis. No need to rehash that discussion, but if he is the player that a lot of people say he is, if he drops because of his 40 time, maybe you could trade up for him. Kind of like how teams probably should have traded up for Sharif Floyd when he started falling because of his arm length. Other than that, maybe Jalen Ramsey. That would be kind of interesting. I don't see a player that is a positional fit for what the Vikings need that if he fell would be worth trading up into the teens for. And these are all players that might fall. So, if Joey Bosa falls, you might as well. I love, having Everson Griffin and Daniil Hunter. And I like Brian Robinson, and I actually still like Scott Crichton. But if Joey Bosa falls, he falls. You got to grab him. For a player that might not fall, worth trading up for might be kind of difficult. You take a look at sort of the positional needs. Like Justis mentioned, there's not a lot of safeties, not a lot of wide receivers. Maybe if Miles Jack falls, but with Jalen Smith there, and the fact that the Vikings may not want to invest a high draft pick in somebody who would ultimately be a nickel player or might force someone else to be a nickel player, might not be worth it. Let's see, DeForest Buckner was really good, so it's possible that if he slips 3 or 4 spots, but I just don't see that kind of trade happening. A lot of people like Jack Conklin. I don't see an offensive tackle pick unless Laramie Tunsil falls. He seems to be Jake Longish in terms of how much of a home run as an offensive tackle he could be. I just don't see it unless you have a player who's in the top 5 who's falling. Miles Jack, maybe. Jalen Ramsey, probably. Bosa and Tunsil, probably. I don't really see it happening. Let's see, Soren Hansen, at Soren Hansen 2, asks how high will Braxton Miller climb and what is his scheme fit for the Vikings? Braxton Miller's kind of interesting. You could kind of think of him as Cordero Patterson, but potentially better. He certainly shows a lot more confidence and focus. Well, Patterson never lacked for confidence. I should probably say just focus. And he seems to already be running better routes based on sort of Senior Bowl reports. But it's difficult to project him, just like it's difficult to project Patterson. I don't see Braxton Miller jumping into the first round. I see him maybe as a late second, early third kind of guy. Maybe it depends on his combine. But he does need to – he plays in a good way like a small receiver in a big receiver's body, which is kind of how Cordell Patterson plays. Now, the problem is Patterson never used his size to his advantage. Braxton Miller might. And so the quickness and agility that comes with a player like that, if you can combine that with the ability to fight for the ball in the air, with the ability to, play physically through routes and win slant routes or win the red line on deep routes and stuff like that instead of getting pushed off your route, then you've got a pretty exciting player. But Braxton Miller, he's a scheme fit. The Vikings want a player like Cordero Patterson, except good. And Norv Turner wants that kind of player. He's a scheme fit, and he can probably play a variety of roles, but it only depends on whether or not he develops well, and that's still kind of a big question. I don't see him sneaking into the first round. Let's see. Joe Webb is a free agent, so Eli Vorderbruggen asks, what about this, Joe Webb? I say yes. I love Joe Webb. He could be a special teams kick returner. You could replace Cordero Patterson with Joe Webb and get maybe a much better teammate. I don't know. Joe Webb might bring a ring with him, so maybe you could bring him back. At Vikings fan 280 asks, should the Vikings take Peter Mortel in the first? That's the Minnesota punter. We are one solid snapper away from a Super Bowl. I think he means holder. Kevin McDermott, not an amazing long snapper, but not bad. Not like Colin Loeffler's final year. Yeah, man. Peter Mortel. It might be the biggest hole in the team. You get a hometown boy. Take him in the first. You got to win with field position, right? So that's it. Hopefully this last part of Norse Code wasn't too boring. Even though it was just me, you don't have the interplay of like having me talk to Dusty or having me talk to James. Hopefully we don't have too many more episodes like this, but circumstances, required this to happen. Once again, thank you for listening. Dusty or James are probably going to do a pre-recorded thing at the end about how this has been Norse Code, and you can donate to us via our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/NorseCode. And again, you can contact us via email. There's a bunch of great email questions we're getting. They're super detailed, so they might even be better than the normal Twitter mailbag questions that we get. And that's norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. Anyway, once again, thanks for listening. I'm Arif.
Into your own hands and making sure that this interview happened and being on the line just in case anything burned to the ground. Again, Dusty and I both salute you. If you would like to donate to the show, you can do so at norsecodepodcast.com. You can go to the very bottom of the page, and there's a little donate button. That goes through PayPal. Or if you would like to become a sustaining member, much like an NPR pledge drive, you can do so at patreon.com/NorseCode. If you would like to donate to the show, if you hear or see value in the broadcast we are providing to you, please help keep the lights on. Help throw us your tree fitty. It keeps the Loch Ness Monster at bay, and that's all we're really trying to do. So, again, thank you. If you'd like to get a hold of us, you can do so at the Twitter account NorseCodeDN. You can also email the show at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. We've gotten a lot of great questions out of there recently, so if you would like to have your question on the show, please do so over there. But that is going to be it. We're going to have 2 shows this week. We're going to do this, and we're going to have a Super Bowl preview. So please keep your eyes peeled for it. We're going to have our Super Bowl preview dropping most likely on either Thursday or Friday. So for Dusty, for Justice, for Arif, my name is James. Thank you so much for listening, and our formula is this: keep Teddy alive. And we'll see you on Friday.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this: we go out, we hit people in the mouth.